He made millions laugh as the hot-headed Sergeant Vince Carter on Gomer Pyle, USMC. But behind the sharp uniform and booming voice, Frank Sutton was hiding something much darker. And now, after decades, a mystery that surrounded his life and his sudden death has finally been solved. But trust us, it isn't good. Did you grow up watching Frank Sutton on TV? Comment 1 for yes or 0 for no below, because what you're about to hear might change the way you remember him forever. Mystery finally solved. For decades, fans of actor Frank Sutton were left puzzled by the sudden and unexpected end to the life of the man, who famously portrayed the hot-headed yet lovable gunnery Sergeant Vince Carter on the classic 1960s sitcom Gomer Pyle, USMC. Sutton's booming voice, rigid posture, and impeccable comedic timing made him a fixture in American homes and a beloved presence on television. But behind the scenes, Sutton's personal life and untimely death were cloaked in mystery. Rumors circulated, half-truths were repeated, and over time, the facts became distorted. Now, with new information and a clearer picture finally emerging, the truth has been revealed, and it's far from the heartwarming story many fans had hoped for. On June 28, 1974, Sutton was preparing to step on stage at Shreveport's Beverly Barn Dinner Theater for the play Love, a nostalgic return to his theatrical roots. But he never made it to the curtain call. The news sent shockwaves through the theater and beyond. One moment, Sutton had been joking with cast members and preparing for curtain call. The next, he was gone. There was no time for goodbyes, no warning, no final encore. Fans across the country were blindsided by headlines that simply didn't compute. Frank Sutton, dead at 50. How could someone so full of life, so commanding, so vibrant, vanish in an instant? He collapsed of a sudden heart attack in his dressing room, moments before the show was set to begin. The audience was ushered out. His co-stars were stunned. Sutton was just 50 years old. For many, Frank Sutton's sudden death felt like a contradiction, a cruel twist of fate that didn't make sense. How could a man so full of life, so physically commanding, so emotionally grounded, be gone in an instant? To his fans, Sutton was the embodiment of vitality, a man whose every appearance crackled with energy. Whether barking orders as Sergeant Vince Carter or engaging the audience in theater performances across the country, he exuded strength and control. But behind that facade was a man quietly grappling with an invisible enemy, his own failing health. In truth, Sutton had been living on borrowed time for years. Beneath the crisp military posture and booming voice lay a body worn down by years of neglect. Like many men of his generation, Sutton carried his burdens silently. He smoked heavily, a common habit in mid-century Hollywood, and maintained a diet that leaned more on convenience than wellness. But most damaging of all was the relentless stress he subjected himself to, not just from the pressure of fame, but from his deep, almost punishing, sense of professional duty. He had spent years pushing himself through television shoots, stage tours, and promotional appearances with little regard for rest. As his career evolved from sitcom star to seasoned stage actor, Sutton kept the same grueling pace, driven by a fear that any slowing down might lead to being forgotten in an industry that moves quickly and replaces easily. Privately, the warning signs were there. Friends and family later recalled Sutton wincing from chest pain after performances, catching his breath in between lines, and brushing off fatigue with a wave of the hand and a line like, "Just a bit winded. I'll be fine." He'd even collapse into chairs backstage between curtain calls, drenched in sweat, but still insist on getting back out there, believing that anything less would be letting the audience down. Despite those moments, Sutton refused to take his symptoms seriously. Doctors had urged him repeatedly to undergo cardiac evaluations, and records show that he had been made aware of risks tied to coronary artery disease. But he postponed appointments, canceled follow-ups, and minimized concerns. To Sutton, acknowledging a weakness, especially a physical one, meant inviting the possibility that he could be replaced, or worse, pitied. It was a mindset shaped not just by Hollywood, but by his own past. A decorated World War II veteran, Sutton had served in the South Pacific, where physical toughness and emotional restraint were not just admired, but expected. That wartime code, reinforced by the masculine ideals of the 1950s and 60s, made it nearly impossible for him to say the words, "I need help." To those closest to him, Sutton's health seemed like a ticking clock. His wife Toby had encouraged him for years to take a break, to slow down, see specialists. perhaps even take a temporary hiatus from performing. But Sutton was a creature of habit and duty. He would reassure her that everything was fine, that he just needed more coffee, more rest, less worry. Yet each time, his color grew a little paler. His energy didn't return quite as quickly. His famous thunderous bark started to sound like an echo of itself. Then came that fateful night in Shreveport. Moreover, his final days were filled with intense pressure. After Gomer Pyle ended, Sutton sought to reinvent himself on stage, eager to prove that he was more than a one-note comedic actor. He took on demanding theatrical roles, often touring across the country with minimal rest. While audiences were delighted to see him live, Sutton was reportedly exhausted, working grueling schedules and performing under conditions that placed immense strain on his body. A family blindsided. The suddenness of his death sent shockwaves through his family, friends, and fans. His wife, Toby, and their 2 children, including son Joe Sutton, who would later become a successful playwright, were left reeling. They had known that Frank was working too hard, had seen the bags under his eyes and the lines etched deeper into his face, but they had no idea just how fragile his health had become. Sutton had always brushed off their concerns, masking serious symptoms with humor or distraction. In interviews years later, family members expressed deep sorrow over the silence that had kept them in the dark. "He didn't want us to worry," one relative said, "but in protecting us, he left us unprepared." His colleagues were equally devastated. Many had grown accustomed to Sutton's relentless energy and presence. He was the engine of every show he joined. No one expected him to fall so suddenly. In the days and weeks after his death, there was confusion, grief, and a growing sense of guilt. Could someone have done more? Could they have insisted he slow down? Would he have listened? The tragedy of the unsaid. In the years following his passing, rumors began to circulate. Some fans speculated that Sutton had battled a secret illness, or that he had been privately struggling with addiction. But the truth was more mundane and more heartbreaking. Frank Sutton died, not from scandal or hidden demons, but from the very values that made him so beloved: perseverance, loyalty, toughness, and an almost stubborn sense of duty. It wasn't vanity that kept him from seeking medical help. It was fear that if he slowed down, he'd fade into obscurity. Fear that if he admitted weakness, he'd betray the image so many fans cherished. He had become a symbol of strength for millions. Letting that go wasn't just difficult, it felt impossible. What remains today is a painful what if. What remains is a painful what if. What if Sutton had sought treatment? What if he had slowed down? What if someone had intervened? In the years following his death, some fans speculated about hidden illnesses, addictions, or deeper personal struggles. But the truth is more sobering, and in many ways, more tragic. No one will ever know the answers. For decades, fans accepted the story at face value, but recently uncovered medical records and private letters suggest there may have been more to his death than a simple heart attack. A once-locked family memoir hints at a mental breakdown, and a secret he kept from even his closest friends. Frank was fighting demons. One document reads, "He didn't want anyone to know. He didn't want to be remembered as weak." Even his own son, Joe Sutton, remained mostly silent about his father's final days, until now. A guy who put his heart and soul into every role he accepted, Frank Sutton was a man who frequently sacrificed his personal well-being in order to fulfill his responsibilities. Because of the expectations that fame had put upon him, he was motivated by the urge to demonstrate his worth, to continue working, and to fulfill those expectations. In the end, it was precisely that drive, the element that made him such an engaging performance. That was also a factor in his premature failure to live up to his potential. Now that the facts have been revealed and the veil of mystery has been lifted, what is left is not just sadness for a life that was cut short, but it is also a cautionary story about the perils of disregarding one's health in the quest of success. It is important to remember that even the most talented actors can be quietly suffering behind the scenes, and the story of Frank Sutton serves as a reminder of this fact. And in the case of Sutton, the mystery that surrounds his passing is not just painful, it is also a sobering lesson that may ultimately provide his followers closure, even if it is not the ending that they desired to hear. If you're drawn to hidden Hollywood stories and unsolved truths, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, because the story you're hearing now is just one of many untold tales of classic Hollywood. Frank Sutton and the Woman Behind the Man. In 1946, at the dawn of a post-war America brimming with change and promise, Frank Sutton found a different kind of anchor, one not in the applause of audiences or the bright lights of television, but in a woman named Toby M. Eagler. Brilliant, driven, and deeply intuitive, Toby was far more than a partner in life. She was a creative force in her own right, a talented writer who would later leave her mark on the golden era of soap operas. Their marriage was not the flash-in-the-pan union so often seen in show business. It was, instead, a partnership rooted in shared ambition, mutual admiration, and a profound emotional bond. From the beginning, Frank and Toby were each other's fiercest champions. While he built a career on screen, she carved out her place in television writing, where precision, heart, and story were everything. Each respected the other's craft, and both understood the sacrifices required to pursue a life in the arts. At home, the creative energy was constant. Frank often turned to Toby for insight into a role or script, valuing her storytelling instincts and emotional clarity. In turn, Toby leaned on Frank's grounded presence and unshakable work ethic. Together, they navigated the unpredictable waters of television and theater, always returning to the solid ground they had built together. Their household was a haven of stability amid the chaos of the entertainment industry. Despite the long hours, frequent travel, and pressures of public life, Frank remained a devoted husband and father. The couple raised 2 children, a son, Joseph Joe Sutton, born in 1951, and a daughter, Amanda Sutton. Their parenting reflected the same values that shaped their careers: honesty, creativity, compassion, and intellectual curiosity. Joe, inspired by both his mother's literary acumen and his father's theatrical legacy, would go on to become a respected playwright and drama professor. His most acclaimed work, Voir dire, premiered on Broadway to critical praise for its searing exploration of justice, race, and human conscience. Joe credited the rich artistic environment of his upbringing for shaping his voice, a home where ideas mattered, where feelings were discussed, and where storytelling was both an art and a form of truth-telling. Amanda, though more private and removed from public life, played a vital role within the family. While she did not pursue a career in the arts, she provided a quiet strength and emotional core to the Suttons, helping preserve the closeness and continuity that defined their inner world. To outsiders, Frank Sutton was the gruff, no-nonsense Sergeant Vince Carter, barking orders and clashing with Gomer Pyle's bumbling innocence. But those who knew him privately spoke of a different man, gentle, devoted, and overflowing with pride for his family. In interviews, Sutton rarely boasted about his fame. Instead, he spoke of Toby's intelligence, Joe's accomplishments, and Amanda's quiet wisdom. "My proudest role," he once said, "wasn't on a soundstage, it was at home." Their marriage endured for nearly 3 decades, until Frank's sudden passing in 1974. Through every season of life, success and struggle, triumph and tragedy, Toby remained by his side. She never remarried. In the years after his death, she became the steward of his memory, guarding his legacy with quiet dignity. She gave a few interviews, but those who spoke with her noted the fierce love and respect she still held for the man she called her husband. Toby Sutton's life after Frank's death was defined by grace, strength, and loyalty. She honored their shared story not just through words, but through the life she continued to lead, rooted in the same values they built together. And though she lived on without him, she never let the world forget the man behind the uniform, the actor behind the sergeant, the husband behind the legacy. Together, Frank and Toby Sutton left behind more than a body of work. They left a blueprint for love in the spotlight, for creativity nurtured through companionship, and for a life defined not by fame, but by meaning. To many, Sutton was more than just a supporting character on a hit television show. He represented a unique kind of American everyman, stern but soft-hearted, comically rigid but undeniably human. As Gunnery Sergeant Vince Carter, Sutton yelled, barked, and stomped across the screen in perfect comedic contrast to Jim Nabors' naive Gomer Pyle. But there was always a glimmer of affection underneath the fury. It was that duality, the thunder followed by the wink, that made him unforgettable. Yet off-screen, Frank Sutton lived a life that was far more private and, at times, profoundly isolated. The Mask of Laughter. Born in Clarksville, Tennessee, in 1923, Sutton was no stranger to hardship. His early years were shaped by the struggles of the Great Depression, and after high school, he joined the U.S. Army during World War II. Sutton served in the South Pacific and fought in some of the war's most harrowing campaigns. It was an experience that left its mark, not in obvious scars, but in quiet discipline and internal steel. When the war ended, Sutton didn't talk much about his service. Instead, he turned his focus to acting, channeling his intensity into a career on stage and screen. It wasn't long before television came calling, and with Gomer Pyle, USMC, Sutton found his defining role, but the fame that followed came at a price. Behind the hearty laughs and military barks was a man carrying more than just scripts. Sutton struggled with stress, high blood pressure, and a work ethic that bordered on obsessiveness. He was known to push himself relentlessly, rarely resting, always demanding more from himself than anyone else would dare. In a tragic irony, the same drive that had propelled him to stardom may have hastened his end. Beginning at a young age, Sutton showed a keen interest in acting, despite the fact that he was growing up during the Great Depression. He participated in student performances and local theater when he was still in high school, and it was during these experiences that his passion for performing became very clear. In spite of the challenges he faced financially, he never wavered in his determination to attain his goal of being a professional actor. After receiving his diploma from East Nashville High School, he decided to follow his desire by enrolling at Columbia University in New York City. He completed his studies with a concentration in drama and received a degree with honors. Early on, it was clear that he was committed to being an expert in his field, and his academic accomplishments demonstrated his profound dedication to achieving personal growth and brilliance. The events of World War II, on the other hand, had a significant impact on Frank Sutton's life, just as they did on the lives of many other young men of his time. Following the assault on Pearl Harbor, Sutton made an effort to enroll in the United States Marine Corps. However, he was not accepted because of his colorblindness. Unfazed, he enlisted in the United States Army and went on to a distinguished career in the Pacific Theater of Operations. In his capacity as a member of the 293rd Joint Assault Signal Company, he took part in 14 assault landings, which included the invasions of Leyte and Luzon in the Philippines. Through his time spent serving in the military, he developed a profound sense of discipline and patriotism, both of which would later have an impact on the roles he played on screen. After serving in the military, he was promoted to the rank of sergeant and received an honorable discharge at the end of the war. This was an event that gained him the respect of his fellow veterans as well as admirers. Following his return from the war, Sutton recommitted himself to his acting profession with a much greater level of devotion. Throughout the decade of the 1950s, he was active in both the theater and television, earning a reputation as a versatile character actor. Rise to stardom journey. Early on in his career, he appeared on television in a variety of roles, including those on shows like The Edge of Night and United States Steel Hour. One of the most noteworthy early film parts that he played was in the film Marty, which was released in 1955 and won 4 Academy Awards, including the award for Best Picture. Additionally, he acted in the film with Ernest Borgnine, who had already won an Academy Award. Sutton's performance helped establish his credibility in Hollywood as a professional actor, despite the fact that he performed a minor role. It wasn't until the 1960s that Sutton was cast in the role of Gomer Pyle, United States Marine Corps, which was a spin-off of The Andy Griffith Show. This was the moment that Sutton's career truly began to take off. Jim Nabors played the role of Sergeant Vince Carter, a stern drill instructor who was continually frustrated by the well-intentioned but clumsy Private Gomer Pyle. Sutton performed the role of Sergeant Vince Carter himself. The synergy that existed between Sutton and Nabors was explosive, and the dynamic that they displayed on television became the focal point of the programming. Sutton's ability to combine moments of harsh authority with times of sensitivity and comedy enthralled audiences and kept them at the edge of their seats. Through his portrayal, the image of the austere military officer was given a human face, and depths of compassion, devotion, and even tenderness were shown behind the harsh exterior of his character. Between the years 1964 and 1969, the show was shown, and it quickly became a cultural phenomenon, attracting millions of spectators each week. A place in the annals of television history was secured for Sutton as a result of his performance, and his catchphrases, particularly the booming PEL, were ingrained in the language of American popular culture. He lent a sense of reality and authenticity to his performance, which was undoubtedly influenced by his own military experience. Sutton was more than just a humorous foil for the lead character. Not only did his portrayal strike a chord with service personnel, but it also struck a chord with civilians, which made him a revered figure during a turbulent age that was characterized by the Vietnam War and shifting perceptions about the military. Following the conclusion of Gomer Pyle, United States Marine Corps, Sutton maintained his career in television, theater, and advertisements. He made several appearances as a guest star on well-known television programs such as The Twilight Zone, Gunsmoke, The Untouchables, and Love American Style, demonstrating his versatility as an actor. Despite the fact that he never attained the same degree of success as he did during his time as Gomer Pyle, Sutton continued to be known as a respected and admired actor among his contemporaries. In his latter years, he shifted his attention more toward theatrical work, appearing in dinner theaters and regional shows all throughout the country. He continued to captivate audiences with his limitless energy and charm in these settings. Following the production run of the iconic comedy Gomer Pyle, USMC came to an end in 1969. Following 5 successful seasons, Frank Sutton continued to be a recognized face on American television. This was especially true due to the fact that he maintained a professional connection with his former co-star Jim Nabors. Following his shift into a regular position on the Jim Nabors Hour, a musical comedy variety show that aired on CBS from 1969 to 1971, Sutton became a regular on the show. Through this show, fans were given the opportunity to appreciate the operatic singing abilities of Nabors in addition to comic segments that maintained the charm and humor of the previous sitcom. This show signaled a change of pace from the military setting of Gomer Pyle. Sutton, along with fellow Gomer Pyle graduate Ronnie Schell, was a significant contributor to the comedy aspects of the show. He frequently appeared in amusing sketches that highlighted his well-honed timing and expressive range. In these skits, Sutton usually played the role of the brother-in-law of the character of Nabors. This gave him the opportunity to once again play off of Nabors' more innocent and friendly image, which was similar to the relationship he had with the character of Gomer Pyle. This new environment, on the other hand, provided Sutton with more leeway to experiment with a variety of comic tones, with the result that he frequently gravitated toward domestic or situational comedy rather than military strictness. The performances he gave displayed his versatility and his ability to flawlessly transition between parts that were more serious and authoritative and ones that were more lighthearted and focused on family comedy. Due in part to Sutton's good comic chemistry with Nabors and Schell, the program itself garnered favorable ratings during its 3-season run. Sutton's appearance on the Jim Nabors Hour helped him maintain the solid fan base he had built up during his time on Gomer Pyle United States Marine Corps. Sutton broadened his acting range by venturing into live theater, notably in the popular genre of dinner theater, which flourished in the 1970s. This was done in addition to his work in television. This arena gave him the opportunity to engage with people on a more personal level and to demonstrate his abilities in a live situation, freeing him from the confines of television scripts and filming deadlines. Among the numerous parts he portrayed on stage, one of the most famous performances he gave was in the pioneering comedy Norman Is That You?, which was written by Ron Clark and Sam Bobrick. He played the character of the father in the movie. Sutton's character required both comedic flair and emotional depth because the play dealt with issues of generational conflict and homosexuality, which was a controversial subject because it was written at that time period. It was via his depiction of the perplexed but ultimately loving father that spectators were able to get a peak of his abilities to convey sincerity and emotion to a role that nevertheless required keen comic sensibilities. His stage work was frequently commended by critics, who pointed out that his charm and enthusiasm were able to transition extraordinarily well to the more intimate and engaging atmosphere of dinner theater. During the 1970s, Frank Sutton appeared as a guest on a wide range of other television programs in addition to his work on the stage and Nabors show. He also appeared on other shows. His renowned depiction of Sergeant Vince Carter often led to him being typecast, but these jobs gave him the opportunity to break out from that typecasting with ease. He demonstrated a breadth that astonished fans who largely knew him from his military character by making appearances in both serious programs and comedy. He took on roles in both types of shows. When Sutton appeared in a variety of roles, including those in criminal dramas, family shows, and anthology programs, he offered a level of professionalism and intensity that was unique to each of those roles. Because of these appearances, he was able to keep a consistent presence in the public eye, and his image within the entertainment business as a trustworthy and brilliant character actor was strengthened as a result. Over the course of this phase of his career, Frank Sutton continued to garner admiration from both audiences and his contemporaries for his relentless work ethic, his devotion to his art, and his ability to make every character, whether comedy or serious, feel genuine and unforgettable. His post-Gomer Pyle years were a reflection of his flexibility and his ambition to improve as an actor. He secured his reputation not only as a television star, but also as a dynamic and skilled performer in a variety of genres. A heart that couldn't hold the weight. The death of Sutton was not the type of tragedy that would become a scandal. Nonetheless, it was the kind of sorrow that left people looking for answers. He did not pass out in the midst of the mayhem that was Hollywood. Rather, he did so in a peaceful and modest village in Louisiana, where he was getting ready to do what he loved, perform. He continued to work. He continued to make audiences laugh. And he continued to pursue the same source of motivation that had motivated him since he was a boy. At the age of 50, his passing seemed not just unexpected but also unfinished. Interviews to say goodbye were not conducted, and there was no big closing performance. There is only quiet. Stress, tiredness, and an old-fashioned unwillingness to consult a doctor unless it was absolutely essential were some of the warning signals that were there. According to those who knew him the best, a man of his time, Sutton was stern, haughty, and hesitant to accept vulnerability. In many respects, he was a man of his generation. This might be the reason why the general population was so astonished. From the beginning, he appeared to be unbreakable, like the precise definition of the male strength stereotype. His heart, however, was deteriorating on the inside. Following his passing, a flood of tributes arrived. The actors that worked with him recalled him as being kind, giving, and quite professional. Following the announcement, Jim Nabors, who was devastated by the information, would later refer to Sutton as the rock of their program. He brought us back down to earth, Nabors remarked. He served as the focal point that helped the humor come to life. Over the course of several years, admirers continued to write letters, unclear of what had actually occurred and hoping for a more compassionate reality than what they had been provided with. There were many who adhered to misconceptions, such as the notion that he passed away smiling, that everything was a misunderstanding, and that he had merely withdrawn from the spotlight. However, there was no interesting twist. It was just a life, one that was lived to the fullest and terminated suddenly. Sutton was laid to rest with full military honors, which was a fitting conclusion for a man who had served his country and his audience with steadfast dedication over his career. His family, which included his wife Toby and their 2 children, silently lamented the loss of a husband and father who was far different from the military figure that appeared on television. Time has a way of sanding down the rough edges of memory, and perhaps that's fitting for Frank Sutton. Though the mystery of his death may no longer hang in the air, the why behind his early passing still leaves a bitter taste. But maybe Sutton wouldn't want us to dwell on that. Maybe he'd prefer we remember the roaring laughter, the impeccable timing, and that rare ability to steal a scene without stealing the soul of it. In the end, he wasn't just playing a gunnery sergeant, he was the heartbeat of Gomer Pyle, the steady rhythm behind the chaos. And though he died before his time, Frank Sutton lives on. Every time someone hears, "Move it, move it, move it," followed by the unmistakable warmth that only he could bring. After all these years, the truth about Frank Sutton's pain, his pressure, and his untold story has finally come to light. Not every Hollywood ending is happy. Sometimes, the brightest stars carry the darkest shadows. Do you think the industry failed Frank Sutton when he needed help most? Let us know in the comments. Like this video if you remember his unforgettable performances, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional deep dives into old Hollywood's untold history.